Drawing busy street scenes is a great subject, but a great challenge as well for a number of reasons. And I think probably most of all is the often overwhelming objects, details, layering at ground level. Often we really like the idea of what we see of the buildings in the streetscape, but once we come down to that ground floor level, there's people, there's street furniture, there's outdoor pot plants, there's signage, there could well be cars, and all sorts of things that just layer upon layer and can make it very difficult. So how do we draw? How do we tackle a scene such as this? Can I say that this would be the same way I would do this if I were drawing on location or drawing from a photo? My method is the same, simply because, well, it seems to be the way that makes most sense to progress. So, as always, I try and start with something closer, but also something that perhaps I can draw a little more accurately. And then I go as far down as I can before I hit the ground level details, and then I try and establish some of those. Now, this is a very busy scene. There are going to be a lot of lines involved close together. So I want to create a sense of depth. I think that's very important, to have a sense of closer, further away, and furthest away. And so as part of that, because otherwise it can just look too overwhelmingly detailed. So I'm using a 0.3mm pen for these closest details, which will be on each side of the road, the buildings on each side of the road, closest to us, and just this group of people on the lower right-hand side. So at the moment now, having done enough of the building that I can position this closest figure, I put it in. Now, we may not necessarily like drawing figures if we like drawing buildings, but we need to work out a reasonably credible way of representing them. So that's just one of those things that we can put a little bit of individual, quite specific effort in. And I do have, 2 or 3 videos on drawing people in a fairly loose, I think, straightforward technique, but also a way of thinking, way of approaching that's very suitable for people who are populating our streets, where we don't focus on them and they're often clustered together. So if you want to check out those videos, they might be helpful. So here I am now, just doing all the figures now that are going to be in the way, in the way of the architecture that I'm going to draw at ground level. Now, I also move across. Now, can I just say, I started this with a 0.3mm pen, but it's actually a brand new one, which means it's a reasonably thick line for me there. And then the next pen down, instead of using the 0.2, which sometimes the one I have at the moment is a little bit inky, I thought I'd use another 0.3, but one which is reasonably, I think, noticeably dried out, to give myself a lighter line. And then I use a 0.1 for the church that rises above the end of the street. So you can see I've gone across and done all the people. In a scene such as this, the hustle and bustle, the busyness of the relatively narrow streets is all part of the kind of rich visual effect of the scene that can make it compelling to draw, which is another reason why we need to make sure we don't leave out a lot of the detail, because we lose a lot of the reason probably why we wanted to draw this in the first place. And obviously, foreshortening, getting that visual compression, that narrowing of things that are moving away from us, such as the fronts of all these buildings going up the street, is really vital. The danger of drawing this way is that if, as we move across, we're just even slightly too wide with every line or every section, with so many vertical lines so close together, we can end up quite some distance across. And part of what we want is the tight perspective. It's the really tight view up the street, because that channels our attention, channels our interest, and it also explains what's happening. It lets us get meaning from this very busy scene. So getting the perspective angles correct is important because as far as the architecture goes, we're drawing the effect of detail, not the detail. And if you haven't heard me talk about that in other videos, I have a playlist on it. It's a technique of, we don't draw precisely what's there, we draw the effect of what's there. It works wonderfully with trees and leaves, but also with crowds of people or foreshortened street frontages that are moving back. So the focus in my drawing at this point is to keep everything tight, not to let these buildings slowly come out too far across. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm aligning each individual building with the people who are underneath. Now, I did leave out that tall figure in black, who I eventually worked out is some sort of advertisement for local tours. And so is elevated on stilts and I think is built up in the head too. I wasn't here. This is a family member's photo, so I actually don't know where it is. So if you recognise it, and I'm sure someone will, I'm sure it's in the UK somewhere, please tell us in the comment what English city this is, or Scottish or Welsh it could be. So I'm also now aligning with everything I've drawn. If I'm convinced that what I've drawn is reasonably accurate, then I use it to align the other things. And you'll notice too, I put that banner across the street in. Now, as it turned out, I forgot to do anything more with that banner, and I would have liked to have blackened it across because it would have given us some foreground, well, probably more midground than foreground, but it would have sat easily from a visual point of view forward of what's behind it, which I think just would have been a nice 3D effect. So I can still do that now, but not so that you see it in the photo. Maybe I'll do it before I take the thumbnail. So yeah, I'll do that. So if you want to look at the thumbnail again for the video, you'll see the effect with that banner across the roadway, blacked in. So you'll notice though that I did establish ground level as well as I could, as early as I could as well. But you can't do it early. The very worst thing, and I see it so often, is people have committed to a straight line angled in some way going up or down the street. And visually, it's just not how anything looks. And when we draw in ink, well, that line's going to be there. And the best we can do is draw things over the top of it, which is not a great way to capture an effect of realism. So I've got my 0.3mm now. So you'll see that I switched from the new 0.3 to the old 0.3 as I went along the street, and also simply tried to draw it with a more with a lighter touch, lighter pressing, and less detail as we went further up the street. So we're trying to make it easy to see what's happening when there's so much happening. One of the things you'll notice is that with these people that I drew across the street, and you'll notice I'm basically putting in a solid block of people across the street, except for a narrow gap between two of them more on the right hand side. And that's quite deliberate too, because I want the feeling that this is crowded. And really, once we get used to drawing figures, while the ones closest to us might be a little bit of effort or risk in a more finished drawing, as they go further back, it's so easy to just very gesturally, very quickly, but very effectively give the sense of a crowd of people a long way away. So it's a shame to miss out on such visual impact when it's so easy and quick to do. You'll notice now I've moved across the road and I'm coming back up the other side, and at some point and this may be the point, I've changed my pen to be using the full of ink 0.3mm, because I want this building on the left, which is even closer in fact than the buildings we can see on the right hand side, to be just as dark. Now, I did and ah with those people in the center of the road, whether to use the more inky 0.3 or the less inky 0.3. I used the less inky in the end because I wanted them to feel further back than the people on the right. I'm still not sure. I think I was caught between the proverbial rock and the hard place. So, again, with this severely foreshortened architecture, oh, see how wonderful that perspective line was? The important thing is to correct them. Not to go ahead and add more detail to a line that's wrong. So, and fortunately there is a lot of detail here, which does go a long way to disguising lines that aren't quite right. But if we leave the angle of the line wrong, well, we're always going to notice that. And when we start to do things such as this potted globe cropped plant, it's important that we make sure that we line up the base of things with the credible base of the people who are next to it. This is where we want to make sure that the people in our street end up looking like they're on a street, the same street as the building, and they're not floating off the ground or they're not too low. And so a lot of effort to just make sure the feet line up with the ground level of the things that are next to them. And now we've got this building here. And in looking at the total width of my drawing, I did place 4 dots on my paper before I started to just show me where the 4 corners of the image was, just so that as I got, well, it meant on the right-hand side I could actually start in the right place, just whatever, 7-8 millimeters in from the end. And it also, as I was starting to get closer to the left-hand side, let me just work out whether or not I'd spread across too much or whether I'd kept it nice and tight. This drawing took me just under 50 minutes to do in real time. So you're watching it being drawn about 3 times the normal speed. If you want to see it slower, if you want to see more detail into my mark making, you can reduce this speed half by using the cog icon and just following the directions in the box that appears. So you can do that, and you can still work out what I'm saying as well. But this one is getting pretty close to being done. Now, can you see how on the right hand side those come forward? Also notice that with the people, when I was bringing lines down, the vertical lines of the architecture down, I tried to not have the lines crash into the people, to leave a very slight gap around them. It doesn't look unrealistic, but it does help create a sense of separation, or visual separation. Now I'm doing some very brisk hatching for the shadows across the road. It is important, I think, to add shadows, and particularly when we have light and dark quite as clearly pronounced as this. I spent quite a lot of time doing the shadows, and in the end I decided to put the shadows on these people on the right-hand side as well, because they are in shadow. And the truth is, I suddenly realized I did have to look quite carefully to just separate one figure from the other in a few cases. So, but before I do that, I've got my 0.1 now, and I'm going to do the church on the hill, the rather large church on the hill. My apologies to any locals if it's more than a church. It looks a bit small to be a cathedral though, but it does have a lovely elevated position. I'm sure it's been in many, many street sketch drawings over the years. So as I said, we're always trying to create a sense of depth. So you can see I've really not gone into too much detail, and even the darkness of the value of the shadows of the windows and so forth are relatively lighter than the closer ones. And so now I'm thinking of, no, I need to put some more shadow on these, and so that they really do sit in that dark section of the street. And the effect, of course, is to create more of a sense of sunlight hitting those people in the middle of the street, which is what I'm wanting. Now, I also revisit some values. I decide to darken the jumper of this closest person to us so that that figure stands out a bit more clearly. And again, some other adjustments. Stopping and looking back and thinking, is this the effect I want or not? I hadn't really finished this closest person's legs and feet, but because of what I did on the left-hand side, I thought I needed to, but I still wanted to keep it fairly gestural. So we're pretty much done now. I'm not sure why it's slowed down so much at this point, but I suspect it's because that's it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting to watch. I hope you found my strategies of how I think and develop a drawing such as this. As I said, this is the strategy I would use drawing directly in ink on location. So it's a good one to practice from photographs, I think, from the comfort of our drawing place at home. So I hope you give it a go. Of course, you'll find this on my channel community page. Please hit the like button if you found this helpful. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, however long it takes, and whatever it is, make sure you have fun. I certainly did here. I'll see you next time. Bye.